So, Brother Michael Imhotep is the founder of the African History Network and host of the African History Network show, Sundays from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on social media and Blog Talk Radio. And for 7 years on 9:10 a.m., the Superstation WFDF Detroit. He's an historian, radio show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. He's a weekly panelist on the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show on Fridays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, providing political and historical analysis on the Black Star Media Network. His bio is extensive, and there's probably a lot more that we could say.
Yeah, you don't have to go through the whole bio.
I had to go through the whole thing, but I did want to
go through the whole thing.
A sense of who he is and what he has been doing. And I'll say this, a few weeks ago, I witnessed an interview that you did, Brother Michael, with Professor Manu Ampim, someone who Brother Antonio connected with sometime within the past year. And we were just blown away by what he brought to us in terms of history. I'm sure that there's so much between the two of you that resonates. So we're really happy that we were able to make this connection and bring what you bring to our listening audience. So why don't we start just by you telling us about the African History Network that you have and what that mission is and, what that whole vehicle is all about.
Okay. And yeah, Manu is a friend of mine. I've interviewed him a number of times over the years, going back to about 2010, I think was when I first interviewed him in 2010. So the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. So I'm a talk show host, as you said. I've been doing the African History Network show 14 years. It's been 14 years since May 10th, 2024. 7 years was on 9:10 a.m. WFDF here in Detroit. And, we deal with history, current events, politics, economic empowerment, issues pertaining to African Americans. So we do the show usually Sundays. I may do broadcasts during the week. I edit excerpts of my appearances in different media platforms. So we have all that. People can go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also follow me on Facebook, The African History Network on Facebook, and Michael Imhotep on YouTube. Okay, so this is, dealing with, and I've interviewed a number of scholars over the years. Some of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Professor James Small, Professor Kaba Kamene, had Dr. Claude Anderson on the show over the years as well. People like Runoko Rashidi before he passed away. We have I've interviewed a number of different scholars who are ancestors now, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Richard King, Dr. Fukiao. So it's so many people. We've had probably maybe about 1,500 episodes of the show. So it's a lot of work, but this is something that's needed, and we're focusing on, as I say in a lot of my lectures, because I do lectures also, this type of information has to bring about behavior modification. That's why our motto is right now is correct wrong behavior. It's not about debating people. I tell people, we don't learn all this information to participate in some black version of Jeopardy. Okay, to see who can memorize the most facts and figures and win a prize at the end of the TV show. No, this information has to bring about behavior modification. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior. If you become quote unquote conscious, and the term is problematic, but if you become quote unquote conscious, but your behavior doesn't change, what's the point? What's the purpose? Okay, so that's in a nutshell some of what we do.
Okay. Well, I have to tell you that many of the folks that you mentioned are folks that we've had on our broadcast as well.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of it is due to relationships that Brother Antonio has with many of these folks. We've had Dr. Jeffries on. As I mentioned to you yesterday, we had Dr. Malefi Asante on.
Oh, me. I've had Malefi on too. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Tony Browder, Malefi. Yeah.
Yeah, Tony, and he's been here. I mean, some of the folks that you mentioned are folks that we've actually brought to Cleveland. And again, I'll tip my hat to Brother Antonio for what he did to make those things possible. But you know what it all really speaks to is the power of our intellect. I think that the most dangerous weapon in the face of what I call pseudo white supremacy psychosis, because I don't embrace the idea of saying white supremacy, because it's a fallacy. White people are not superior to black folk. And as a matter of fact, white people don't even exist if you want to look at it in a technical sense. You also mentioned that you deal with history, but you also deal with current events. And when I looked I looked at your Facebook page and I saw a number of references to things that were going on. So I hope that we can expand our conversation, not just to history, but also to deal with some of the things that are going on in our country right now. For instance, we're in the midst of a political season. And if you look at the stuff that's coming back channel, there are rumblings that Joe Biden is not going to be running for president in 2024, but there's actually a shadow candidate that's being groomed right now. And sometime this summer, there's going to be a decision to pivot from running JB and putting someone else in there, because they're concerned, and I don't like to say his name, but there's concern that 45 basically could get reelected in spite of all the adversity, the personal adversity that he's facing right now. And I just wonder how it's even possible for us to entertain the thought that our political system is just so dysfunctional right now.
Right. Well, I've heard rumors. I wouldn't put stock in rumors of a shadow candidate or things like that. They're always distractions. It's just like on my show, we've broken down how no third party candidate has won a single electoral college vote since 1968. And it takes 270 electoral college votes to become president elect. You win electoral college votes by winning, not by the electoral college voting. That doesn't take place until the first Monday following the second Wednesday in December, which is in the middle of December. You win electoral college votes associated with the state by winning the popular vote in the state. So anybody that tells you that the popular vote doesn't matter has not read the U.S. Constitution. The popular vote does matter. Republicans know that. Many of us don't. And we fall for these tricks. That's how Donald Trump won the electoral college vote in 2016, and Hillary Clinton got 2.9 million more popular votes, because we've never been taught to really play the game of politics to win. I teach about political self-defense. Political self-defense. First thing you have to do is read the U.S. Constitution, because if you don't understand the U.S. Constitution, you won't understand any of this. That's why the U.S. Census is so important. The U.S. Census was created by the Constitution. First census taken in 1790. The census that the last census that took place in 2020, the population of white people in this country was 57%. That was the first time the population of white people in this country dropped below 60% since 1790. Okay, that scared a lot of people, because there's a fear of the browning of America. Now, all white people don't have this fear, but there's enough of them that have this fear to make a difference. It's enough of them who have this fear to be a threat. There's a fear that by the year 2043, white people will no longer be the majority population in this country. And you have media outlets like Fox News, like Newsmax, right-wing talk radio that prey on this fear, that feed them fear, okay, that drive them towards somebody like a Donald Trump. And in 2016, many white people saw Trump as the great white hope. They saw him as a last resort. Because if you go back, I covered the 2016 campaign extensively on 910 AM WFDF on the African History Network show, right? For a lot of white people, he wasn't their first, second, third, fourth, or fifth choice, right? But they said, I watched about 100 interviews that Trump did and campaign rallies. And then I watched numerous interviews with Trump supporters or people who were reluctant Trump supporters. And overwhelmingly, they said, this is about the Supreme Court. They said, this is about the federal bench. Okay. Well, for many of us, we haven't don't really understand that the president nominates Supreme Court justices, which are lifetime appointments, and the president nominates federal judges. Federal judges are confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So Donald Trump got 226 federal judges confirmed because Republicans took back control of the Senate in 2014, led by Mitch McConnell. McConnell and Republicans blocked 103 federal judge nominations that President Barack Obama made after 2014 and blocked Merrick Garland, who was Obama's nominee for the Supreme Court. So then when Trump becomes president, because we didn't understand how the Electoral College works, you have all these vacancies. So then, and lastly, and I'll turn it back over to you, but lastly, the nominations, that the names for the Supreme Court nominees and the federal judges were given to Trump largely from lists from the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society. Okay, now the Heritage Foundation is a right-wing think tank, and one of the things they do is work on voter suppression tactics. And if you don't believe me, go read the article that Ari Berman did for Mother Jones exposing Heritage Action for America, which is their sister organization, and how Heritage Action for America was the entity that crafted Senate Bill 201 in Georgia, the voter suppression bill in Georgia, as well as copycat bills passed in state legislatures, especially a lot of former Confederate states. Jessica Anderson is the executive director of Heritage Action for America. And she was caught talking in a meeting, and she was recorded and it was released, and Mother Jones published it, talking about how they were the ones that crafted Senate Bill 201. And that was a backlash to Joe Biden winning Georgia in 2020. There was a backlash to the January 5th, 2021 special election that Senator Raphael Warnock won and Senator John Ossoff won, that gave Democrats control of the Senate. It was a 50-50 Senate, but they had control over the Senate. This was a backlash to all of this. So the reason why things are confusing now, and the momentum is shifting toward Biden-Harris right now, if you pay attention to the latest polls, and if you pay attention to what's taking place in the campaign, the momentum is shifting, but it's May, and most people don't pay attention to presidential campaigns really until after Labor Day. Okay. But the Biden-Harris campaign, they're not waiting till after Labor Day. This thing is steadily ramping up. They've opened over 150 campaign offices across the country in the last few months. So this thing is steadily wrapping up. But what we have to understand is history, economics, law, and politics. The acronym I use, HELP. History, economics, law, and politics. Okay. And we have to practice political self-defense.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And that system that, that's been our downfall forever. I'm not knowing how those things would, and they also talk about, the things that happen as far as locally is concerned,
Oh, absolutely.
Your local politicians, and that directly affect you, and when we tend as Black folks, like, I like the statement, and I live by that statement too, that you said earlier. If it's not going to change the way you think, you have to
your behavior
information, and,
yes.
and that's the frustration that I have, with different people, is that when hopefully you would like to think, and you don't want to be naive, that if presented with certain information and certain facts, that you use that information and try to incorporate it into your way of thinking, your way of living, and things to make you a better person,
yes.
And I think, and I'm pretty sure you think too, by doing what you're doing, is that our folks, and taking it a little broader and bringing and talking about Black folks, as our ancestors have laid down the foundation for us, how to deal with these issues. Yes, of course, you have to modify it a little bit because we're dealing with in this particular age, but there are some structural foundational things that are constant, regardless on what time of the century that you are operating in, that is helpful to us, because right now we all over the place. You know, our ancestors are looking at us like, you don't try everything but me. When you gonna try me? And you see this not working for you, because they, you know, with this whole universal principle piece and understanding balance like that, just those little principles alone of dealing with balance and understanding that kind of harmony, it will do so much for Black folks just by understanding that piece as well. You know, real quickly, you know, how we look at the whole religious piece, how the system that we got set up in America. Women were shied upon. They couldn't even be in the pulpit to even preach.
Right.
Their voice was silent. You know what I mean? Right. And something Dr. Henry Clark said, you know, this side would never work until we put the woman where she belonged, because it was about balance.
Yes.
And so again, as I stated before, we're letting the children run the system. You know, they the newcomers on the planet, and we letting them, just like I said before, throwing the kids out the parents out the house and letting the kids run the show. And it's just a matter of time that dysfunction is going to happen.
Yeah. You know, when we look at you having a conversation with Asar Imhotep a few minutes ago, somebody asked the question, are we the same people? No, we're not. No, we're not the same people. But when we look at, if we look at the modern day civil rights movement, for example, okay, look at Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and John Lewis and Ella Baker, Rosa Parks, okay, the modern day, what was called the modern day civil rights movement. That civil rights movement was largely led by African-American male Protestant ministers. And many of them were misogynists, because you're dealing with a society that is misogynistic. You have white male patriarchy, and then that's infused into Christianity. Okay, so they grew up in that. They grew up in that ideology to varying degrees, and then a lot of them brought that mentality into the modern day civil rights movement, which is why Ella Baker leaves the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that she helped co-found in 1957 after she was passed over for a permanent leadership position in SCLC, because Dr. King and others didn't think that women belonged in permanent leadership positions. You know, Dr. King was one of our greatest leaders, very much misunderstood. Brother Vince talked about Manu Ampem, and I've done interviews with Manu previously where we dealt with the distortion of Dr. King's legacy. That brother was a revolutionary. Okay. And toward the end of both Dr. King and Malcolm X's life, their ideologies were converging. You read Martin Malcolm and America, A Dream or a Nightmare by James H. Cone. That was probably one of the first books that, and I read that back in 1994 when I was in college. That was probably one of the first books that really went in depth and dealt with the trajectory of both of their lives and how their ideologies are converging. And when we talk about Malcolm, and we know his birthday is coming up, May 19th, people really forget Malcolm joins the civil rights movement when he leaves the Nation of Islam. Yes, he had Organization of Afro-American Unity, but Malcolm goes to speak to SNCC. He meets with Coretta Scott King in January, I think it was January 1965. He goes to Selma. He wants to meet with Dr. King a second time. They met March 26, 1964 at the U.S. Senate debate for the Civil Rights Act. This is later in the same month that Malcolm officially separated from the Nation of Islam, March 8, 1964, and the month before he leaves for his Hajj to Mecca. But when you study both of these two men, these were revolutionaries, okay? And one of the themes of the Battle of the Bullet that Malcolm delivers March 29th, 1964 in Washington Heights, New York, and then April 3rd, 1964 in Cleveland, Ohio, Corey Methodist Church, and then April 12th, 1964, King Solomon Baptist Church. in Detroit, one of the themes of the Battle of the Bullet was interjecting Black nationalism into the civil rights movement. Okay, so one, when we cannot suppress African American women the same way white men suppress their women. Okay, right. We can't do that. And when we study traditional African society, we saw the position of the woman elevated. Okay, and two, when we have our various movements, we cannot bring white male patriarchy into those movements dressed up in red, black, and green.
Absolutely.
So true. So true. Brother Michael, I want to go back to what we were talking about in terms of population. And you talked about 2043 and the paradigm shift, and white folks are no longer the majority. There are some who might be saying that shift has already happened, but I'm just curious about this hot button topic of immigration right now, because we're getting these stories about all these mass exoduses taking place and all these folks coming into the country, and many of them are not classically white folks. I'm wondering what impact you think that will have on the paradigm of our population and perhaps a shift in power.
Well, let's approach it like this. First of all, immigration policies in America are broken, and it is going to take congressional legislation to fix them. Now, you had the strongest immigration bill that would have been passed in at least 30 years that was just killed by Donald Trump because he didn't want to give Joe Biden a win, and he wants to run on immigration and the border and broken immigration policies, because this is Donald Trump's stay out of prison tour. This is why he announced he was running for president so early, okay? Because he wants to be immune for prosecution. He wants to be able to appoint an attorney general who will kill any federal prosecution against him and his cronies. Okay, so if you're so concerned, they talk about fentanyl coming across the border illegally. They talk about undocumented immigrants coming across, things like this. So if the border was such a problem, why did you tell Republicans in the House to kill the border bill? And Senator John Langford of Oklahoma, conservative Republican, he led the way for this bill in the Senate. And he said, even if Trump is nominated, and other Republicans said this as well, even if Trump is reelected and Republicans maintain control of the House and gain control of the Senate, he said, you're not going to get a stronger immigration bill. Okay, so you have, and the other thing is, I tell people, if you want to stop undocumented immigration, if you want to really crack down on it, first thing you should do is stop eating food that you did not grow yourself, because most likely somebody undocumented was involved in that food getting to your plate. Okay, number one. Number two, when we look at this as a system, right? White supremacy pits groups of oppressed people against each other to fight one another so that the 1% or 5% or 10% can maintain power and manipulate everybody. Okay. This is something that's very, very important to understand, because people will target people leaving other countries coming here because they either are facing political persecution in their countries, because of climate change in their countries, devastating vegetation, okay, or because of other reasons, right? What they don't focus on is, and I think it was Vice.com had an article about this maybe 5 or 10 years ago. When we look at Central America, the U.S. has been involved in shaping policies in Central America that have helped create the condition that a lot of people from Central America are fleeing.
Come on.
So then they come to this country, and then you blame them, but you don't look at the conditions that were created that they're fleeing from. Like when Guatemala, when the CIA helped overthrow the Guatemalan democratically elected Guatemalan government, I think it was 1954. Okay, and then Donald Trump, like in 2016, he loved to talk about the gang. Was it? It's not MSI. It's the gang. I forgot. It'll come to me. It's a Latin gang. It's a Mexican gang. He loved to talk about. Okay. And that became like the poster child for MS-13. I think I
think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, MS-13. He loved to talk about that gang. He didn't tell you that gang started in California in the 1980s and then went into Mexico. Okay, he didn't talk about that at all. He just says, "Oh, this is a Mexican gang and they're committing all these crimes." So yes, you need new immigration laws. Yes, you do. Okay, but at the same time, we have to understand how non-white groups and even some white groups, because so Vince talked about you really don't have anything called white people. Okay, so let's deal with that term white. The term white started being used basically about 1681, starting in the colony of Virginia, after Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 and 1676 in the colony of Virginia. Now, this is before you have what's called the United States. You still have colonies. This is before the Articles of Confederation. This is before the U.S. Constitution, the Philadelphia Convention, 1787. The Bacon's Rebellion was led by Nathaniel Bacon, who was a European white man, Englishman, and he was a tobacco plantation owner. All right, his rebellion consisted of about 500 African Americans. So you had some free African Americans, you had some who were enslaved, you had white indentured servants, and poor whites. They united in this rebellion against the ruling elite in the colony of Virginia, against the wealthy plantation owners, because they understood that they were all being exploited by the same 1%. They were all being exploited by the same group of people. And in December of 1775, this band burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia. I don't know how many people know this history. Go research Bacon's Rebellion at history.com, the official website of the History Channel. They have an extensive article on Bacon's Rebellion. Now, when they burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia, I don't know if this became the inspiration for the song, The Roof is on Fire. Maybe it was. I don't know. Okay. But what happened, more importantly, what happened was after Bacon's Rebellion. It's going to be about 1680, 1681, that in the colony of Virginia, they start implementing the term white for widespread usage to refer to people coming from Europe, in the English and people coming from Europe. Why did they do this? Because previously, and when you read chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., and we deal with a lot of this in my online history classes that I teach, okay? In chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower, 6th edition, Lerone Bennett Jr. talks about how, page 40, he talks about how what we call white people didn't refer to themselves as white. They referred to themselves as English or Englishmen or Christians. And he talks about how the terms for black people or African Americans at that time was we had the terms Moor, black or Moor, Neger, Neger, and Nagar, Negar. Okay. When you look at why the term white was implemented in the colony of Virginia, and then it's going to be adopted by other colonies as well, it was to break up the alliance between these non-white people who were ruling. It was to break up the alliance of free African people, enslaved African people, white indentured servants, and poor whites. Okay, so that the ruling elite could manipulate all of them. And what they did was they implemented chattel slavery, because it wasn't until about 1641 in the colony of Massachusetts that you had your first codified slave laws in the what we would call the 13 colonies. Okay, you had African people entering into some form of what we would call indentured servitude. They would serve 5 to 7 years and then be released. Chattel slavery in the 13 colonies didn't exist at this time. Okay, in the early 1600s. It's going to be after Bacon's Rebellion, right around 1681, that they start changing this to change the treatment of African people and to make a distinction between African people and especially poor white people who had an alliance, because they realized they were being both manipulated. So then they're going to institute chattel slavery. They're going to have harsher treatment for those identified as African, and they're going to use the term white to identify all of what we would call European people, to put all those people on team white, to make poor white people think they're on the same team as the wealthy plantation owners who are exploiting them. Right. To reduce their ability and desire to fight back. Okay, so and we're still dealing with this trick bag today, because you have poor white people voting for Trump, and he's never cared about poor white people. He's never cared about middle class white people. He's only cared about the wealthy. And he just had a campaign meeting with wealthy billionaires. And he's asking them for $1 billion, and he's telling them he's going to reverse Biden's climate change laws, his climate change policies. He's going to reverse all that. New York Times has an article about this. Okay, so people have to, I haven't followed any of this Drake Kendrick Lamar beef. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. Okay, but I can tell you what's going on with this. I can tell you what's going on with things that are going to have consequences for us. All right. If people want to follow entertainment, okay, that's fine. But I don't know what they're talking about. But I can tell you what's going on with this that's going to have a direct impact on our conditions.
Come on, bro. Yes.
This type of information, you can support the African History Network a few ways. Be sure to register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. This is a 10-week class. We're doing more than 10 weeks this time around. Next classes are Saturday, May 4th, Saturday, May 11th, Saturday, May 18th, and Saturday, May 25th, 2024, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register here for the class. The class is on sale $60, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it any time. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you can still watch the entire course. We have the lesson plan here for the entire course also already laid out, so you can look at the content that we cover. We deal with 80 to 100 articles, and I put together this class. I've been teaching this class on and off since 2017. Okay, I've been studying history 34 years now, do lectures across the country, been hosting the African History Network show 14 years. But we look at, there's over 200 slides that I put together, 80 to 100 articles that we'll go through and look at. The 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in class. I'll show you excerpts of the books on the screen usually. And we look at video clips of interviews I've done with historians like Professor James Small, Professor Kaba Kamene, Anthony Browder, who wrote Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, which is one of the books we use in the class, Runoko Rashidi, who wrote Black Star, the African Presence in Early Europe, which is another book that we use in the class. Okay, so you can register for this. Its content is PG-13. You can use this information with your children as well. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, and we'll post the link here. The link's in the thread of this broadcast. And you can support us through PayPal and Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, and through PayPal, paypal.me /the AHN show. So we have the information right here on the website as well. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael and show my picture there. These are fake African History Network Cash App accounts here that have been stealing money from us. There are a few other ones out there I've identified. I'm still trying to get them shut down. You can click right here on our link and it shows our QR code, okay, for Cash App. This helps us stay on the air, keep doing the research, pay some of the bills, etc. Upgrade equipment, take care of what needs to be done.
Absolutely. You know, one second, Vince. I was when you said a couple of things, and I mirror a lot of that what you said, and I try to talk to people about this whole immigration piece. I'm just gonna step back on that real quick about people coming over here, and I don't even know why black folks even taking on a charge, or even talking about immigration like it affects them. You know, because a lot of the jobs that they do, and we, you know, like you said, we're not out there trying to do it anyway. But the question I want to ask, and we tend not to pay attention to directly and indirectly, our involvement in these particular countries that are causing them to flee. See, we never think about, you know, see, we sitting here in the belly of the beast, and not really recognizing these tentacles that are out there manipulating everything. That's why, you know, Vince brings it up all the time, talking about BRICS. The reason you got a BRICS is that they've been weaponizing the dollar, and folks tired of getting their behind beat with the weaponization of the dollar. So they're looking at another alternative, and this is why. So the question I want to ask, and what people should look at, would these people leave their country and come here if we wasn't involved in some of the dirty dealings that we're dealing with in their country that's causing them to flee? Because I truly believe a lot of them wouldn't want to give up their homes. They would want to stay in their culture, to stay in their way of life of doing things. Because when you want to look at it, all they're doing is come for economic reason, because there's really nothing culturally and spiritually that's in this country that would drive them away from their culture to want to come here. If their conditions, the question I would ask, if their conditions was okay, if they was living okay in there, nobody was bothering them, would they leave their country to come to here? That's the question.
Well, when we look at, and I'm posting some articles here, hopefully you can share them, because I'm posting articles to back up what I'm saying. One, they're looking for better ways of life. It's not just economic. It's partly economic, but also many of them are fleeing various types of political violence, rapes, murders, things like this. Also, you have some that are victims of political persecution. So they're coming here because you have, you know, more freedom of speech. You can publicly criticize the president and not end up in prison. Now, we don't know what happens if Trump becomes president again, but you can. So you have those freedoms here. Okay. Now, also, to give you an example here, a lot of people don't know this. Starting with the Herbert Hoover administration. Herbert Hoover wins the presidency in 1928. Okay. He serves one term, mishandles the Great Depression. And President and Franklin Delano Roosevelt is elected in the 1932 presidential election. There were about 1.6 million Mexicans who were deported by the U.S. back to Mexico, starting with Herbert Hoover, and starting in the Great Depression. The Great Depression begins 1929, stock market crash of October 1929. And the government was saying that these Mexicans were taking jobs away from white people in the country. Okay. About 60% of the people they deported were born here legally, were actual U.S. citizens, but they got lumped into this. And when we look at the analysis post that event happening, because it starts with Herbert Hoover, it's going to continue with President Roosevelt. Okay. when you look at the analysis decades later, they talk about how, okay, they didn't take it to the account that they were actually contributing to the GDP. Those Mexicans that you deported were actually producing services, producing goods. They were actually contributing to the GDP, which created jobs. But they just focused on falsely, oh, they're here, so they're taking jobs from white people. Okay. Now, this is taking place in the 1930s and going into the 1940s. And this was the sentiment. All right. But and they overlooked the fact that about 60% of people they were deporting were here legally. Okay. So it's and that whole term, being that you had like 2.6 billion acres of land largely stolen from Native Americans and African people as well, because one of the people I've interviewed on my show numerous times, probably 12, 13 times, was Dr. David Imhotep before he passed away in 2023. And he was a friend of mine, and we did lectures together here in Detroit. We did a couple of lectures together, but he was the author of The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. He deals with the African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years before. These would be the Khoisan, and this was before Native Americans even came into existence. So understanding the history of the Louisiana Purchase and the U.S. getting 828,000 square miles of land from France, and France stole the land from Native Americans and Africans who were here, things like this. So when I hear, you know, white people start calling somebody illegal, I'm like, dude, you really don't want to have this conversation. Okay. You really don't want to get into this history. Okay. Then California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, all that was part of Mexico. The reason why the U.S. gets that land is because of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848, which is what ends the Mexican-American War. And the U.S. pays, I think it's something like $15 million for that land, but it's part of the treaty that ends the Mexican-American War. Mm-hmm. But the Mexican-American War was triggered basically over a border dispute, a land dispute, and the U.S. really wanted to take over the entire North American continent. The U.S. wanted to expand, okay? And they really wanted to take over the entire North American continent. So it's like, you really got to be careful when you start calling people illegal. And then Florida was part of Spain. That was all conquered by Spain. Florida was conquered by Spain. Juan Ponce de Leon, 1513. Mexico was ruled by Spain for something like 300 years, right? All part of that European exploration coming out of the Dark Ages. So, yeah, you really want to be careful with that. And if you want to crack down on undocumented immigrants, crack down on corporations hiring. Mm-hmm. If you want to crack down on undocumented immigrants, crack down on corporations hiring. And the first place you should look at is Donald Trump's golf courses and his hotels and things like that. Because he got busted because he was hiring undocumented. He had undocumented immigrants there working. That came out a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Brother Michael, you mentioned Malcolm X and his birthday coming up on the 19th. We also spoke a bit about Martin Luther King and the revolutionary aspect of them. I'm also thinking about Carter G. Woodson. And I
absolutely.
Yeah, and this is partly relevant because of our brother Lynn here, who was involved with the ASLAALH, the Association for the Study of African American Life History. Yeah. Yeah. A few months ago, I was privy to a conversation about Carter G. Woodson and his affinity to African history. And I just wanted to have this conversation and have Lynn present for the conversation, because there is conversation about the pushback on African history and the focus on Black history and the disassociation of that affinity to African history within Asala. Part of the conversation was how at a certain point we should probably pivot from just Black history and embrace the idea of African history. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were about that. It seems as though when we celebrate Black History Month here in America, we focus exclusively on Black history and we don't expand it when the two are connected.
Right.
They're intertwined. They're in deal with each other, and we need to have a greater perspective and a broadened perspective because of our relationship to Africa.
Right. So part of that conversation, that was part of the conversation I had with Professor Manu and Pim when I interviewed him. I think that was in April of this year, 2024. People can watch that full interview on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, or on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network. So, yeah. So Dr. Carter G. Woodson talked about African Heritage Month. Okay. And really, this was part of the conversation I had with Manu and Pim. That was that would be the next, that would be the expansion of the celebration of what started out as Negro History Week to African Heritage Month, with the focus on Africa and African history. So if we look at the creation of what started out as Negro History Week, the second week in February 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson and Asala creates this back at the time of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Okay, Dr. Woodson was an educator. He had a PhD in American history from Harvard. He taught at a high school, but he also taught at the college level as well. He taught at Howard University for 1 year. Okay, and he understood, because he was an educator, he understood that African Americans knew basically nothing about their history. So Negro History Week was never designed to be the only time of the year that we study our history. It was, he chose the second week in February, not because February is the shortest month of the year, not because it's the coldest month of the year, but he chose the second week in February because it contains the birth dates of Abraham Lincoln, February 12th, and Frederick Douglass, February 14th, which is Frederick Douglass' assumed birth date, because Douglass didn't know his exact birth date and he didn't know the exact year that he was born. So since celebrations were already taking place in the African American community, basically since the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in 1865, and since Frederick Douglass dies in 1895, since those celebrations were already taking place in the African American community, Dr. Carter G. Woodson puts his new cultural celebration within that same period of time, because celebrations are already going on. The Negro History Week, later Black History Month, or African American History Month, was designed to celebrate, teach, study, and acknowledge the contributions that African Americans have made to this country, but also on the continent of Africa. Okay, the continent of Africa was not separate from the celebration, okay, based upon Dr. Woodson's original intent. And there has been an annual theme for African American History Month since 1928. The annual theme is designed to give purpose, to give direction in how you celebrate, what you study, things like this. So it's not saying this is the only thing that you can study, but it gives purpose and direction. And the annual theme is also supposed to be timely to what is taking place in society, what's taking place in the country. So just to give you a quick example, the annual theme for 1928 was Civilization, a World Achievement. 1933, Ethiopia meets Era and Truth. Ethiopia meets Era and Truth. 1935, the Negro Achievements in Africa. The Negro Achievements in Africa. 1936, African Background Outlined. 1960, now he dies in 1950, okay? 1960, Strengthening America Through Education in Negro History and African Culture. 1971, African Civilization and Culture, a Worthy Historical Background. So Dr. Woodson did extensive research on Africa, African history. He wrote his last 3 articles. He wrote with dealing with Egypt, as Professor Manu Ampem talked about. He talked about how Kush and Ethiopia were the precursors to Egypt. These are the mothers and grandmothers of Egypt. So he's steeped in this history. The criticism Professor Manu Ampem had of Asala today is that Asala largely embraces the African-American history, largely to the exclusion of the African history. And what Woodson is saying is that you have to study all of this together, okay? You can't just separate African-American history from African history, as well as in African history connects you to the history of African people throughout the diaspora. So African Heritage Month, which was also Woodson's vision, taking things to the next level, is moving in the same thought process of combining all of that together. And one of the biggest problems I have with the way Black History Month or African American History Month is celebrated across the country. It should be celebrated. It should be, we should have celebrations. We should recognize it and participate in it. But most people who participate in these celebrations, and I would say even organize these celebrations, the majority of them, have never really studied Dr. Carter G. Woodson and never studied the history of African American History Month and why it was created. So we get into, I oftentimes talk about how we don't have to keep recycling the same 15 to 20 sanitized Negroes every year, every February, because largely that's what happens. Or we get into these things that are like really superfluous, don't have substance, and people don't understand that African American History Month can be a very powerful tool to educate our people, but also educate America on history and the accomplishments, what African people have contributed to this country, but also to the world. So we're not using it as a powerful tool to educate and liberate. Okay, it becomes just a celebration. It becomes something, to do because it's February. If we don't do it, people are going to say we're not Black. So we're going to have some type of celebration. Okay. And a lot of these celebrations become watered down. And unfortunately, some of these celebrations give the appearance also that they are trying to make white people feel comfortable with the oppression of African Americans as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And another factor is just our disassociation with Africa because of what we've been taught through our educational process. The last thing some of us would want to be identified as is an African, but our dear brother Rashidi, he always talks about the idea of
Runoko Rashidi. Yeah.
Yeah. You were born outside of Africa, but it doesn't make you any less African because it's in our DNA.
Well, but you have white people running to Egypt. You had going back to the 1800s, you had European archaeologists claiming Egypt for themselves, claiming Nubia for themselves. When Napoleon conquers Egypt in 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte. You have the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb, 1922. So Europeans are constantly running to Africa. They're constantly running to Egypt, claiming Egypt for themselves, claiming Nubia for themselves. When you look at Carthage, Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginians, that's in the area that today is Tunisia, North Africa. They claim that Hannibal was white. They claimed Hannibal was white. Okay, when you look at Emperor Menelik II, the Battle of Adwa, 1896, defeating the Italians. The Italians got their behinds kicked so badly by the Ethiopians. The Italians told the world that the Ethiopians were white because they didn't want people to know that this Black nation defeated them. So you have, and then when we look at mythology, right? Coming out of the Dark Ages, coming out of the 1300s, going into the 1400s, European exploration, the start of the transatlantic slave trade, 1441, with the Portuguese going into the 1500s. As Europe starts to rebuild itself, okay, Europe was hit with civil war, famine, poverty, things like this. The bubonic plague hits in 1347, hits in spurts from 1347 to 1400. Europe loses estimates of somewhere between 25 to 75 million people, right? As Europe starts to rebuild itself, conquer people's lands, go into the Caribbean, set up plantations and start to rebuild itself, one of the things that they do is reinterpret image. Okay, so the Black Madonna and Child that Runoko Rashidi talks about a lot, and he talks about in his book, Black Star, the African Presence in Europe, which deals with the African presence in early Europe. France had about 300 images of the Black Madonna and Child, paintings and statues, things like this. And this is even before the presence of the Black Madonna and Child goes back to Asar, Aset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Even before the Moors go into the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal, in 711 AD, and take the teachings from the Nile Valley region of Africa all throughout Europe. This is even before that. They have these images of what we today call a Black Madonna and Child. As Europeans start gaining power and rebuilding these European nations, you start having a rise in the dominance of the European phenotype. So they start reinterpreting image. So in the early 1600s, Michelangelo paints the Sistine Chapel, and he uses his aunt and uncle as the model for Adam and Eve, and they're white. God is white. The angels are white. When you look at Greek mythology, Zeus, who was the king of the gods, Zeus was said to be from Ethiopia originally, but Zeus gets reinterpreted as a European. Hercules was black. Hercules gets reinterpreted as a European. So one of the things that they do with when you had a rise in these European powers is to reinterpret image. And then when you have European archaeology going in and making these discoveries in Egypt and Nubia, things like that, then they're going to say that these were brown-skinned Caucasians or something like that, but they wanted to totally separate Egypt from Africa and say, oh no, these are not black Africans because you enslaved black Africans. These are not them. This is something else. And they played the same trick with Nubia. Okay. They were saying, they tried to claim Nubia for themselves and say that these were some type of Caucasians or brown-skinned Caucasians or something like that. But these weren't sub-Saharan Africans. These weren't black Negroes like the ones that we had enslaved for hundreds of years. This was something totally different. And what they do is they have to, in various ways, de-Africanize something to then elevate the value and importance of it so they can claim it for themselves. Now, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network a few ways. Be sure to register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understand the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We do thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. This is a 10-week class. We're doing more than 10 weeks this time around. Next classes are Saturday, May 4th, Saturday, May 11th, Saturday, May 18th, and Saturday, May 25th, 2024, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register here for the class. The class is on sale $60, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it any time. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you can still watch the entire course. We have the lesson plan here for the entire course also already laid out, so you can look at the content that we cover.
Yeah, that's like I said, that's a normal tactic that they control that narrative, and so therefore you tell the lie, and after time people begin to believe it, and so and you got to ask yourself, this superior race that we talk about, why is they're going around all over the planet taking our stuff? Why is all our stuff in Europe? You know what I mean? And
right.
And you haven't.
You're talking about like treasures. You're talking about artifacts, things like that. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they claimed it for themselves.
Yeah,
that Brother Rashidi always
you the developers and the originators of all this stuff, but no place in your homeland do you have any of these, monumental structures there, but it's yours. And it's just like the Arabs over there. I never forget a tape that I got from Brother Quasi. And he showed, and I think Brother Pim talks about it as well, that the Arabs over there chipping the hieroglyphics off and selling them. And if that is sacred to you and that's your stuff, you're not going to defame it and do the things that you do to it. You know what I mean?
Right.
If it's your stuff. It's just that simple. And everybody knows it's a documented fact. You guys didn't come around to the 6th, 7th century over there as far as the Arabs is concerned.
Yeah, 7th century AD. Yep.
Yes, yeah. So my point is, why? If this all about superiority or keeping on with this old mirage about their presence of them knowing not even knowing where they come from, because they can't trace their lineage nowhere. You know what I mean? And so if this all a ploy, a part of the whole plan, because you got to stop at one point and ask yourself a question. Why? Why are we going through all this time, money, energy to defame, to lie, to tell half-truths, and do the things that they do, to cover up and not talk about our presence here in America? The things, us being here and things like that, nothing not discovered until we go, even though they may have another name for it, people living there, things, it don't matter. It's all about them.
It's about the narrative. Brother Michael, I wanted to ask you if you had heard any of the social media fodder, I'll call it, about Vladimir Putin and his announcement about all these black images of the Madonna and Child and so forth and so on, and then them having access to that and making it public. Have you heard anything about it? And do you think it's relevant?
I've heard about it, and that has been in Europe for hundreds of years. It's all throughout Europe for hundreds of years. That's not something new.
Right.
Yeah, you're dealing with a former KGB agent. That's not something new. That I just told you. France has the most, according to Runoko Rashidi, France has the most number of images of the Black Madonna and Child. That's at about 300. Okay, and that's in his book, Black Started African Presence in Early Europe. And what Runoko did was he traveled around the world and he took pictures to document this. So he has the pictures in his book, and I have his book here somewhere in the office because that's one of the books I use in my class. So I'm going to find that. But that people that study this history already know that stuff is in Russia. He's not telling us something that we don't know. The people that don't study this history and are amazed by it, and they're the ones impressed. I'm like, and that stuff's been there for hundreds of years. We know this, okay? And this deals with how what one of my teachers, Professor James Small, talks about how Europeans took fragments from the periphery of African spiritual systems to create Christianity. Okay. And so when you look at, you read Christianity Before Christ by Dr. John G. Jackson. Okay. And you start seeing where all this comes from with Christianity and how they took the teachings from the Nile Valley region of Africa, from the African spiritual system and incorporated that into their stories in the Helios Biblos, the Sun Book, S-U-N, the Sun Book, right? And you deal with. I'm
laughing because I just said that to somebody last night. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's important for our people to read the Bible, but you have to understand what you're reading. And we have to also speak to people where they are. Okay. So the Bible can be used as a tool to be a bridge to get to take us back to where we were before foreigners, fakers, and fools came into the continent of Africa, misinterpreted what we had, distorted it, and represented it to the world like they created it themselves. All right. But you're dealing with, you know, for instance, you deal with Noah's Ark, right? Or actually, let's go back to Adam and Eve. Okay. That comes from an ancient Sumerian myth of Enki and Ninti. And Enki was the man, Ninti was the woman. But Ninti in Sumerian means woman of the rib or lady of the rib. Okay, that's an ancient. You're dealing with stories that are told over and over and over again over thousands of years, adapted to various people's cultures. Okay, so when we deal with Heru being born on December 25th to the Virgin Auset, and we deal with the Annunciation, the Immaculate Conception, the Virgin Birth, the Adoration. These are ancient African principles. These go back, the story of Osar, Auset, and Heru dates back to at least 3300 BC in ancient Nubia. Okay, at least. So you're talking about 5,000 years ago. All right. So, and because of largely the transatlantic slave trade, even though it was happening some before then, but for most African Americans, the reason why we're Christians is because our parents were Christians, our grandparents were Christians, our great grandparents were Christians, and our ancestors before them, largely because of the transatlantic slave trade. And we haven't reclaimed our mindset and our history and culture to really understand history prior to that. Okay. So, and this is not to attack Christianity, as Sister Nubia Wardford, who's a cultural anthropologist here in Detroit and goes to the Sudan and does archaeological excavations, as she's talked about on the African History Network show. She talks about how Christianity has actually done a lot to maintain the iconography from Africa. It's in the icons, and it's in the graphics and things like this. It's still there today. Okay. But a lot of the ideology is anti-African and has been used against us. Okay. So it's all in how the spiritual system or religion is used and whose cultural paradigm you're operating within.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's real quick, Vince. It's funny, man. It's just a validation and almost a revelation, because what you just said, you know, about the similarities and where they got a lot of these stories.
Yes.
I was just telling somebody that last night. The same thing. Helios, Billios. I'm saying, look, a lot of us marvel at what we may read in the Bible and the Revelations and the prophesies. And I said, when they got together in the council, they took information and these stories from all you could find prophecies, or they talk about the future.
Right.
I mean, the point is, people think that's the only point of literature that talks about that. The Bible is the only book that speaks on futuristic things that could come to pass. And I'm just saying, they stole it out of those stories from other older stories.
Yeah, those are ancient stories coming from ancient Africa, coming from the Nile Valley region of Africa, ancient Kemet, Sumer, different things of this nature. So, and the cultural paradigm is extremely important, but also you mentioned the council. So there were 21 ecumenical councils from 325 AD, starting with the Council of Nicaea up until like the 1800s. One of the councils, the Third Council of Trent, about 15, Third Council of Trent was about 1563 or so. As a result of the Third Council of Trent, this is why you have the Gregorian calendar introduced about 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII, which which is the calendar we use today. And they had to recalculate when Easter was celebrated. Okay, because Easter celebrated on the first Sunday following the first full moon following the vernal equinox. So Easter is a movable feast because it's based upon astronomy. Okay, now Christmas is based upon astronomy as well. It's based upon the movement of the sun entering into its lowest point, entering into the winter solstice, its lowest point around December 20th, December 21st, and then from December 22nd, 23rd, 24th, it appears the sun stands still. The sun does not move. And solstice actually means sun stands still when you look at the etymology of the word solstice. Then on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree northward. And December 25th marks a increase in the amount of sunlight each day, the duration of the duration of the amount of sunlight. So starting on December 25th, the days start getting longer again. So in ancient times, December 25th was looked at as the birth date of the Son of God, or the Son, the S-U-N, not the S-O-N. Okay, so all this gets incorporated into these celebrations. It gets incorporated into Christianity, and Christ is a title, not a name. Christ coming from the Greek Christos, which means anointed or anointed one, which comes from Karest, which is in the ancient Middle Nether language, Ka, meaning spirit, rest meaning to rise, Karest meaning the rising of the spirit. So all this comes from us. Mm-hmm. Okay, but we have to remember, we have to take back our minds, reclaim our history and culture, and see where all this comes from.
Yes, agree.
I'm so glad that you put it within the perspective of Kemet, because, you know, when we look back at that original prototype of Asar, Aset, and Heru, you know, it's not uncommon to hear people talking about Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And I kind of
well, that's what the Greeks call them.
Right.
That's what the Greeks call them. Yeah, but they worship them too. And a lot of the Greek deities were influenced by deities coming from ancient Kemet. You know, as well as Roman deities also. They learned a lot of that from us. Okay, so we really have to take back this history. Now, when we take back that history, everything else around us will change. And you have to have, you know, Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small, when they teach as well as when I teach, they use what's called the pyramid principle. And I've modified it a little bit. So the foundation is African history and culture. African history and culture gives us our values, our interests, and our principles. This gives us a cultural paradigm that we see reality through. Okay, it gives us our history and culture, gives us our self-esteem, our self-development, our self-worth. I usually show the pyramid of Khafre in Giza, right? So the foundation is African history and culture. The two sides of the pyramid are economic empowerment and political empowerment. Your history and culture influences how you engage in the economics and your understanding of the economics, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other side of the pyramid is political empowerment and understanding politics and how you engage in politics. Now, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. This is what politics is. Politics is far beyond just voting. Voting is one part of politics, and it's an important part, but it's not the only part of politics. Politics impacts every aspect of our lives, from the water we drink to the air we breathe to the food we eat. And for all the economic empowerment gurus out there, and my degrees in business administration from Wayne State, I understand this better than most people, and taught entrepreneurship for 7 years. Laws and policies govern and impact your economy and your economics. Okay. Now, when we look at the economic empowerment, we look at the economic part. African Americans have a deep, rich history of cooperative economics, the co-ops. Okay, whether it was mutual aid societies like the Free African Society in 1787 and the Free African Union in 1780, whether it was the Colored Merchants Association in 1928, coming out of the National Negro Business League, which was founded by Booker T. Washington. And the Colored Merchants Association was a cooperative of hundreds of African-American owned grocery stores across the country, whether it's the Colored Farmers Union, founded about in the 1880s in Texas. And this grows to 1.2 million members. We have, if people read Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard's book, Collective Courage, which deals with a deep history of the types of co-ops and how we engaged in economics. Okay, now right here in Detroit, you just had Detroit Food Co-op that just opened, Malika Kinney and many others. And this is an African-American owned grocery store that's structured as a cooperative. Okay, and they got tremendous coverage from local media here, a lot of buzz on social media, a ton of people. They opened, I think it was May 1st, and they have their grand opening May 18th, right? We have a deep, rich history of cooperatives in our businesses being structured like that, whether it's whether you have a business that may be owned by 2 or 3 people in a traditional structure and they're part of a larger cooperative, or you have a business that's actually structured as a cooperative where the members are also co-owners, okay, of the business. One of the most popular types of cooperatives today would be credit unions, where the people who have accounts are also what they refer to as members. Okay, they're also co-owners. So how you engage in economic empowerment, because you have a lot of people out here trying to pass off white capitalism dressed up in a red, black, and green dashiki and calling that economic empowerment for Black people. And that's not. Okay, now you can learn some valuable things about marketing and accounting and different things like that, right? But when we actually deal with how we did this, William Washington Brown and the True Reformers in 1881, when we actually study how we actually did that, it was through the cooperative system, largely.
Yeah, that whole piece, reminds me. And I mean, it's just funny, like you said, and that's something Dr. Leonard Jesse always said, take whatever you got and Africanize it. He always talks about that and mentions that, Africanize it, and I think that's again, that's always been the key to us learning, and something that Dr. Amos Wilson said about culture, because it's all interconnected. See, I mean, yes, it was brilliant how people put this stuff together. I mean, come on, if you've been on the planet forever, you had to come up with some solutions on how to live with one another, how to run a community, a family, how to get along with other ethnic groups. You had to come about some kind of solutions, So everything is interconnected. And and some Dr. Amos Wilson said, culture. When people speak of culture, a lot of times they think about food, dress. He said, but culture is economics, and just like you just said with your pyramid, it's economics. Right. And if cultural states that we wear hats like I got on my head, guess what? Somebody in the community is going to make that hat, and we're going to spend our money with it. So culture.
Yeah, that's a Kango. That's a Kango you're wearing, brother. That's old school. I know about the Kango. I have a few myself, man. I started wearing Kangos, because of Run DMC and the Kango Kid, UTFO. When I was a kid,
Samuel L.
Well, it wasn't because I started wearing Kangos because of hip hop. Oh, it wasn't because Samuel L. Jackson does wear Kangos, but I started wearing them because of hip hop. Okay. And when I was a kid, I couldn't afford Kangos. So when I became an adult, right, I could do that. So that goes back to Run DMC. That goes back to the rapper, the Kango Kid, who was known for Kangos. He was part of UTFO. Okay, they had the Roxanne songs, things like that, right? So that's what influenced me and also LL Cool J. Can't forget LL Cool J, right? That's what influenced me to wear Kangos.
Yeah, but like I said, if someone in our community was making Kangos or whatever, and it's cultural, there's some cultural about that all of us partake in. Then culture is therefore economics as well. You know what I mean? And it's all interconnected,
Right, exactly.
Well, Brother Michael, I'm looking forward to our conversation next week. We talked about doing a part 2, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to promote your appearance on our show for the week on Facebook, as well as doing a promo on WERE, so people will be able to tune in during the radio hour. I know that you have a class to teach, and I got to go visit my mama. She lives 3 hours away, so I'm going to drive down to Chillicothe. But I really sincerely appreciate your presence on our show today, and look forward to having further conversations to bring the knowledge that you bring. It's obvious to me that you have a passion for history. It's reflected in how easily you just recall these years and events and so forth. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wish I was
a lot of work.
brother. I wish I was. In the closing moments, if you would like to give us some more insight on your class and invite folks to the class that you're teaching.
And I just posted a link here. So visit my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I teach a class on Saturdays. Today is going to be 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's called Ancient Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So this is it's structured as a 10-week course, but we're going past 10 weeks. We have 4 sessions left, including today. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. And when you go to my website, we have my class lesson plan there. For each class, you can download the class lesson plan as well. We do thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. I've been teaching this class since 2017, and it evolved because because of me doing my online radio show at the time, people had so many questions for me. Okay. Yeah. If you just scroll down, you'll see the information there, for the show. For the class, if you scroll down, people had so many questions, and they were asking me I was already doing lectures. They were asking me to teach classes. So we take you through our history. We look at some ancient African societies, Kemet, Nubia, Ta-Nehisi, Ethiopia, things of this nature. And we try to go through history chronologically. And you keep going down because it shows the flyer and gives more information. It shows my class lesson plan. So we have classes May 11th, May 18th, May 25th, and June 1st. Okay. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch this anytime. So even after the class is over with, you'll still have full access. There are about 200 slides in the class. I put together the PowerPoint presentation. There are 80 to 100 articles that we look at as well. Okay. And there are video clips that we look at in excerpts of interviews I've done with some of our scholars, Professor James Small, Runoko Rashidi, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Tony Browder, Professor Kaba Kamene. So we look at some excerpts of interviews that I've done with them also. This content, and if you scroll down below the picture, below the flyer, shows my lesson plan. The content is PG-13. The content is PG-13. So you can use this content with your teenagers, with your youth. It's not overly graphic. I don't do a lot of cursing, anything like that in the class. Okay. And we also deal with what the Moors introduced into Europe and how all of this gets twisted around when the Moors go in and educate these Europeans, because everything basically we taught Europeans came back to kick us in the behind. Okay. And we're going to see how this leads to the transatlantic slave trade. And this really puts us on a trajectory to where we are today. When you talk about the Central American countries, when you talk about the Caribbean countries, things like this, a lot of those are going to be conquered by Christopher Columbus on his 4 voyages. When we talk about Haiti and what's going on in Haiti today, that was the island of Hispaniola. In the western third of the island of Hispaniola is where Haiti is. And then that's going to be conquered by the Spanish about 1492. But the French take over the western third of the island of Hispaniola in 1697. Okay. And it becomes a French colony. And then we know you have the Haitian Revolution beginning in 1791. So we start seeing how all this history is connected, and we can see all this going back to Christopher Columbus, European exploration, Europeans coming out of the Dark Ages. All right. So, and your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. They're both interconnected, interrelated. So visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, register for the class today, and we'll see you in class today and the subsequent weeks.
All right. Well, my brother, you laid it out for us today.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you.
Thank you for being here. And I don't know, I'm ecstatic. You know, I and Lynn as well, we always talk about the importance of history and knowing who we are, because you gain your power from self-knowledge, and
Yes.
they've done everything that they could to take our knowledge of ourselves away from us and prevent us from being effective in obtaining freedom. You know, the freedom starts here. So this is where the battle is taking place right now. It's a battle for our mind space. What
Yes.
we have to do is arm ourselves with knowledge, and from that we will derive the wisdom that it takes to be successful in life. Thank you for joining us on 360 Info Network.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll look forward to our conversation next Saturday.
All right. Thank you, brothers.
All right.
Peace.
All right. And as always, know yourself, love yourself, and be yourself. Make today your absolute best day. Peace, everyone.
Peace.
Peace. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network a few ways. Be sure to register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understand the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. This is a 10-week class. We're doing more than 2 weeks this time around. Next classes are Saturday, May 4th, Saturday, May 11th, Saturday, May 18th, and Saturday, May 25th, 2024, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register here for the class. The class is on sale $60, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it any time. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you can still watch the entire course. We have the lesson plan here for the entire course also already laid out, so you can look at the content that we cover. We deal with 80 to 100 articles, and I put together this class. I've been teaching this class on and off since 2017. Okay, I've been studying history 34 years now. Do lectures across the country. Been hosting the African History Network show 14 years. But we look at there's over 200 slides that I put together, 80 to 100 articles that we'll go through and look at. The 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in class. I'll show you excerpts of the books on the screen usually. And we look at video clips of interviews I've done with historians like Professor James Small, Professor Kaba Kamene, Anthony Browder, who wrote Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, which is one of the books we use in the class. Runoko Rashidi, who wrote Black Star, The African Presence in Early Europe, which is another book that we use in the class. Okay, so you can register for this. This content is PG-13. You can use this information with your children as well. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, and we'll post the link here. The link's in the thread of this broadcast. And you can support us through PayPal and Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. So we have the information right here on the website as well. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael and show my picture there. These are fake African History Network Cash App accounts here that have been stealing money from us. There are a few other ones out there I've identified. I'm still trying to get them shut down. You can click right here on our link and it shows our QR code, okay, for Cash App. This helps us stay on the air, keep doing the research, pay some of the bills, etc. Upgrade equipment.